Hi, hello, vanakkam, and welcome to yet another episode on Little's Law YouTube channel. For the last few days, we are seeing about the various logic controllers like the if controller, the while controller, once only controller, simple and transaction controller, interleave, random and random order controller. We also see about the throughput controller where we are able to control the test using the number of throughput we achieve, and we are also able to achieve the number of throughput using the throughput controller. And we also see about its various limitations and the various ways of how to use the controller effectively. Today we are going to see another controller which is similar to the throughput controller. So the previous day we saw about the throughput controller which controls the throughput, and today we are going to see about the runtime controller which limits the running time of the test in its controller as one of its parameter. So let's see about what is a runtime controller, how to add a runtime controller, and how to use it effectively with various combinations. And also we'll see the differences between the runtime controller and the various other controllers. And we also see about how to use the runtime controller with other controllers as a parent and child controllers. Today's session is going to be very interesting and useful to you. Please do watch the video till the end of the video to get the complete information, and I'll try to keep you more excited. So before we move on to the video, this is me, Vasant Shanmugam. I request you all to subscribe to our channel if you have not subscribed yet. Like the video, share the video with your friends, and comment your feedback and your queries in the comment section. So with no further ado, let's go to the video. So to add the recording or to add the runtime controller, we first need a test plan, and under the test plan, we'll need to add a thread group. So thread group is the basic element. On top of it, we are going to build all the requests and all the complete test scenario and everything. So now we have the thread group, and let's add the logic controller. So today we are going to see about the runtime controller. And in runtime controller, we have just three parameters, and two are the very basic parameters. One is the name, where it tells what controller is it. And then we have the comment section where we can enter the comments about the runtime controller and what purpose or any basic information which is required. We can add that in the comment section. And then we have the runtime, which is asked in the seconds. So in case if we want to run a test for 30 minutes, so it has to be converted into seconds. So which means a 30 minutes test will have 1800 seconds. And in case if we are running the test for a 1 hour test, so it has to be 3600 seconds. So for now, let's just have 60 seconds, which is a 1 minute test. Then let's add the request, the HTTP request, which we normally use it for testing. Then we'll add a listener, a view results tree listener, which we normally add for every test that we do, which will show us how the test is running and what the test is doing actually. And then we'll add a summary report. So this will give us the number of samples that has been executed. So far we have added a runtime controller for a 1 minute duration. Then we have added a view results tree and a summary report. And here we'll add another delay. So this delay will help us to give a breathing space between one request and the next request. And also we don't need to continuously hit the request back to back. So I have added a think time here, and let me add the think time. So here the duration is asked in milliseconds. So in case if we want to give 5 seconds of delay or 5 seconds of think time, we'll have to convert the seconds to milliseconds. So which is 1 second is equal to 1000 milliseconds. So for a 5 second of think time, we'll have to add 5000 milliseconds. So here I have added 5000 milliseconds, so which means I'm giving a 5 second of think time between the first request and the next request. So let's now execute the test and see how does it work. And also we'll see the settings now. So now we have the thread group. So we have one thread and we are supposed to execute one count, which means we request only one iteration and one hits or one request. But in the runtime controller, we are able to see the test which has to run for 60 seconds, which is hardly 1 minute. And we have the think time here. So let's see what happens. So in the thread group, we have one hit, but in the runtime controller, we have 60 seconds, which is 1 minute. So let's see which are how does the test is getting executed. So let's move on to the execution place. And here we could see the timer. So it has started with 0th second and it's executing. So we could see the elapsed time of the current running test here. And meanwhile, we were able to see the number of hits that we are achieving in the runtime controller test. So far we have got 4 requests, but initially we were supposed to get 1 request. But now the test is running continuously. And so far we have crossed 30 seconds in the test. And we have achieved 6 consecutive requests. And we have crossed 45 seconds here. And finally, we have completed the 1 minute load test or 1 minute execution with the runtime controller, adding the ramp up time. So here we can see in the thread group, we have asked for only one iteration, but in the load test, in the test that we have executed, we have got 10 samples, which is we have executed the test for 1 minute. So irrespective of whatever we have given the thread group, we were able to achieve the runtime controller. So let's make another quick change. So here, if I'm giving as 20 iterations and I'm keeping the same 60 seconds as my duration. So let's see what happens, whether the test will run based on the runtime controller for 1 minute or whether the test will run to achieve the 20 count of 20 iterations. So I still have the same user load and I'm just increasing the thread count, the loop count from 1 to 20. And let's see what happens at the end of the test, whether we are running for just 1 minute to achieve the 10 iteration or whether we are running the whole test to get 20 iterations. So let's see how does it work. And I'm not making any changes in the think time as well. So let's see how does it work. So now we could see 3 requests has got executed for 18 seconds, 4 requests for 20 seconds. We have achieved 6 requests in 30 seconds. And now we have reached 40 seconds successfully with 7 requests and 8 requests for 45 seconds. And now we have reached the 1 minute duration of elapsed time, but still the test is continuing. So let's see. So we have achieved 12 hits or 12 iterations, but there was no change in the runtime controller. But the thread or the test is still executing to achieve the 20 iteration mark. So here we could see we have achieved 15 hits, or 15 hits has been executed in 1 minute and 36 seconds. So let's wait for a few more seconds to see what. So here we could see we have achieved 18 requests for 1 minute and 50 seconds, 19 hits for 1 minute 57 seconds, and 20 hits for 1 minute 59. So here we could see for 2 minutes we have achieved 21 hits. So this test looks like it is going to be a forever test. So these are some of the places where we have to be very careful. So for now, I'm stopping the test. And here, let's make a quick change. So I'm changing this to infinite. And here the load is going to be 60. And let's see, let me again reduce it for the time concern. So for now, I'm keeping it for 30 seconds, and let's see what are we going to achieve. So instead of having the thread group to the number of iterations, so I'm actually removing it, and I'm keeping it to infinite. And let's see how does the test execute. So far we have crossed 14 15 seconds, and we have achieved 3 5 4 hits. So let's see what happens if we have this level of setting. So these are some of the settings which we have to be careful, otherwise the test will keep on executing without any end. So we have to be very careful while executing the test. So again, in this scenario, we have kept this as 30, but the test is continuing even after 30 seconds. So in this scenario, and this setup is also has to be carefully considered. So I'm stopping the test again. So let's keep it finite. So it has to be 1, and the runtime controller has to be 30. So let's again run the test and see what happens, whether it goes as an infinite test or whether it ends in the time that we have given to the runtime controller. So we could see we have got 3 requests in 16 seconds. The test is running continuously. So let's see what is going to be the end of the test. So here we could see the test has stopped its execution at the 30th second, and the thread group setting has to be the number of threads. We can make any change in the number of threads, but the loop count has to be carefully calculated. So it has to be kept as 1. That should be fine to avoid any of the infinite iterations to happen. So let's make a quick change. So let me increase the thread to 2, and let's see whether this makes any change like we have seen in the previous test. So I've changed the thread group to 2, and the runtime controller is still kept as 30 seconds, and we have the same request and a think time of 5 seconds, and we could see the requests are getting executed, and so far we have crossed 15 successful seconds. Let's see the summary report to see how many requests we have achieved, and we have reached 25th second. We have 5 seconds more to end the test based on the settings that we have given here. So yes, so with this, we were able to see that the thread group has to be in this level of setting to achieve a clear and comparable and a good clear test. So the runtime controller, we can set the time here, but for the thread group, we must not make any change more, or we should not manipulate it, so that this will create an infinite test, and we have to be very careful in doing that. So let's do one thing. So let me add another runtime controller to see how does it work. So let me duplicate here, and this is going to be the request 2, and let's change this runtime to 45 seconds, and let's see how does this test work, whether the test stops at 30 or 45, or what is going to be the duration of the test. So let's add, so I'm having a number of threads as one to avoid any confusions here. And I have both the runtime controller in the same thread group with one user with one loop count, and the first runtime controller with 30 seconds and the second runtime controller with 45 seconds. So let's start the test and let's see how does it work. So here we could see we have achieved one request for the first runtime controller and two requests for the first runtime controller, three for the runtime controller for the request one, four for the first request, five, and we have already crossed 30 seconds. And after the 30th second, the next runtime controller has started its execution, and let's see for how much duration the second request is going to execute. So here we could see the first request has executed for 30 seconds, and the second runtime controller, it looks like it will execute for next 45 seconds. So far we have achieved 6 requests for the total duration of 1 hour, 1 minute and 10 seconds. So the total test has to be around 1 hour, 1 minute and 45 seconds, 1 minute and 15 seconds, since it is 30 seconds here and 45 seconds here. And yes, so based on that, the test has completed its execution at 1 minute and 20 seconds. So this is how the runtime controller works if we keep multiple runtime controllers in the same thread group. So let me make one more change. So let me duplicate another runtime controller here, and this is going to be the third request. And let's see in what order do they work. So let me reduce it to 15 seconds. So let us make a quick change. So the first request is going to be 20 second, and the second is going to be 25 second, and the third is going to be 15 seconds. So let's run the test and see whether they make any change based on the number of or the duration. But here we could see it actually works in a top-down manner in a sequential way. So the first controller starts to execute and the duration has to be 20 seconds, and then the second request, the second runtime controller will start. Yes, so as we said, the second runtime controller has started and it will execute for next 25 seconds. And then the last controller, the last runtime controller, will run for the last 15 seconds. So this is how the runtime controller works when we keep them inside the same thread group. So based on this, we will have to decide, or we'll have to plan how to set up the runtime controller. So we could see the last request has started its execution here. So when we want multiple scripts to run with the runtime controller, we have to be very careful in placing them. So we have completed the thread group. We have completed the test. So what I'm going to make now is, let me disable or let me remove these requests, the second and third request inside the first thread group. Let me duplicate the thread group here. So before that, so let me duplicate the thread group. So here I have one thread again with the same setup. So nothing has changed. Let me just change this request number to 2. So the first thread group has one runtime controller for 20 seconds, and the second runtime thread group, again, it has one user with the runtime controller with the request 2. So let's see, because in the previous test we saw the runtime controller in the same thread group has executed in a top-down manner, not everything at the same time. So now let's see, we have two thread group and two runtime controller in two separate thread group with each user. So let's now see how does it work, whether they work sequentially or whether they execute at the same time. So the first request has come from the runtime controller 2. So here we could see the first request also has started execution and the second request has also started its execution. So let me add a combined listener. So let's add a combined listener here and a combined thread summary report here to see how does it work. So let's run another test and see. So here as a total, both the runtime controller requests has started execution at the same time. So this is how we have to design. So in case if we want to have sequential execution of multiple requests, we have to properly place them in different thread groups with the same setup, where we have to set up with the duration here and the loop count has to be set up in this way. So with this, we can easily achieve whatever the number of load that we want to achieve. So now let's make some other quick change and let's see how does they work. So let me disable it for now. Also, let's see. So I'm adding another controller under this. So let me add a once only controller to see how does it work. So I'm adding a once only controller under a runtime controller for 20 seconds. And let's see how does it work. So this will actually help us to understand like how to use the various controllers as a parent or as a child controller. So let's run the test. So here we could see, since it is a once only controller, we have got just one request so far. So let's wait for a few more seconds and see how does it work. So far we have reached an elapsed time of 17, 18, 19 and 20 seconds. And yes, the test has completed its execution. And since we have used a once only controller under a runtime controller, we were able to achieve just one request. So that's how the once only controller works under a runtime controller. So let's now change it to a different controller. So let's take a random controller and let's duplicate this request and see how does it work. So let me duplicate it to 3 different requests like we did for our example in our random controller. So we have 3 requests and we have a random controller, and that random controller sits under a runtime controller. And let's now run the test and see how does it work. So again, we could get the second request that has got executed in the random manner. And then another second request and another second request. One more second request we have got. So with that, we have completed the test execution. So we could see a different level of executions under the random controller when it comes inside a runtime controller. So let's now change the controller to a random order controller. So here we have got random order controller, and let's now see how does it work. So here we could see all the 3 requests have got executed for the first time but with a different random order, and then again the second, first and third request, but again in a random fashion, and then third, first and second in a random fashion. And then we are going to end the test. So I think this is going to be the last set of requests that I've got executed. So with that, we have completed the execution. So random order controller does not make any difference even though it is under the runtime controller. So let's now change the controller to a throughput controller. So now we have a runtime controller which will run for 20 seconds, and let us have a throughput of 20, and let's see how does it work. let me disable these requests for now to see how does this one particular request work. So we have a runtime controller of 20 seconds. So it has to run for execute for 20 seconds, or whether it has to execute 20 hits. So let's see what happens in the test. So we have got the first request at the 16th second and 19th second. So we are crossing the 24-second mark. So we have achieved this runtime. So we were able to complete the test for 20 seconds, but we are not able to achieve. So we were able to achieve in percent. So sorry. So let me make it to total executions and let me run the test again. So if you have got one request at the 4th, 5th second, two requests for 10 seconds. So this time we have to achieve 20 total executions for 20 seconds, or either it has to be 20 seconds execution or it has to be a 20 hits execution. So far we have crossed 24 seconds, and with that the test has completed and we were able to achieve just 4 requests. So no matter which controller you place inside the runtime controller, the runtime controller takes control of the throughput controller. So let's see whether we can make any other controllers inside. So let's add a loop controller and let's see what happens. So let me add a 10 iteration here. So in fact, we were not able to achieve it here, but let's see whether the loop controller inside the runtime controller makes any change in the execution. So yes, for the first time, we have executed 10 requests. So for each iteration, we were able to achieve the request. So it looks like we will be achieve. So far we have achieved 30 requests for 20 seconds for 3 iterations. So based on the controller that you keep it as a child for the runtime controller, the number of iterations gets changed. So now let's make another change here. So what we're going to do is we will remove this controller, and let me just copy this. We'll keep it inside this runtime controller. So we have a runtime controller. So what I'm going to do is, like, we are going to add another controller as a parent of this controller, and let's see what happens. So now we have a loop controller as a parent of the runtime controller. So let's see what happens. So we will keep it as 10 iterations under the runtime controller, which executes for 20 seconds, and let's see what happens. So even though we have the loop controller on top of the runtime controller, so far we have achieved just 2 to 3 requests for a 15-second duration, and we have achieved 4 hits for a 24-second duration. And it looks like the loop controller has taken its control. So let's see whether we will achieve the 10. So in fact, we have already crossed the 20-second mark. So the test is going towards the 10 iteration test. So far we have achieved 8 iterations, successful iterations. And let's see how does the test proceed further. So we have got 9 successful iterations, and we have got the 10th iteration. And the test is still continuing to execute. So again, the test is going in a different way. So it is going to be an infinite test. So let's stop it for now. Let's change the loop controller to another controller. So let's make it to a interleave controller, and let's see how does this test work. So let's run the test and see how does it work. So we have got 1 hits so far with an interleave controller as a parent of a runtime controller. We have got 2 requests for 10 seconds, and let's see whether it is going to be an infinite test or whether it stops as a finite test for 20 seconds. So we have not made any change in the interleave controller settings. So the test has completed. So here the runtime controller has taken its control. So it has executed for 20 with 4 seconds of think time and ramp up time. And now let's change the interleave controller to a once only controller and let's see how does it work. So we have the once only controller as a parent of a runtime controller. And so far we have achieved just one request and two requests for 10 seconds and three requests for 15 seconds and four requests for 24 seconds. So with that we come to an end. So even though we have got once only controller as a parent of a runtime controller, but still we were able to run the test for 20 successful seconds. So let's now change the test to a throughput controller. So now we have a throughput controller and the total executions has to be 10 per user and we'll increase the user to 2. So we have 2 users now and throughput we require a throughput of 10. So let's change to 20. Let's change to 10 per user and we have a runtime of 20 seconds. So let's see how does it work or what we are going to achieve at the end of the test. So far we have achieved 4 requests for 10 seconds, 6 requests, 7 requests. So even though we wanted a 10 hits with the 20-second 10 hits per user for this runtime controller of 20 seconds, yet the test has stopped its execution at the 24th second, which means the runtime controller has have its own power over this throughput controller. So I think this session would have been very useful. We have seen a mix of various controllers. We have seen how does the runtime controller works as a child of multiple controllers and how does this runtime controller work as a parent of a different controller. So I think this video would have been really useful to you. Please do subscribe to our channel for more interesting videos. Thank you. Till we meet in another interesting video. It's bye from Vasan Shanmugam and Little Slaw.